Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode with Jack Skye. This episode was a really fun one for me to record because Jax is a former student of mine, and it was really fun to catch up and hear all about what he's been doing now that he is a Ph.D. student. So Jax is a Ph.D. student in neuroscience at the University of Iowa, and he offered some really great advice for anybody thinking about going to graduate school. We talked about differences between graduate school and undergraduate school. And there's just some really fun back and forth about what graduate school is and why or why not people should go. So please enjoy this episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the Career Journey Podcast, where we explore exciting careers and how to get them from the people who've lived it. I'm your host, Brittany Avila. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy. All right. Hi, Jax. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Yeah. So Jax is a former student of mine, so I'm extremely excited to kind of hear what he's been up to since the last time I saw him. But let's get started at the beginning. So we like to start from the very beginning. What did you think you wanted to be when you were a child? Or did you think about it?
So I started thinking about my career really early in childhood, actually.
Yeah?
So yeah, when I was in kindergarten, I figured out I wanted to be an astronomer and I wanted to be a physicist. That was
good careers.
Yeah, that was what I was pretty set on. My mom and I would go. No,
that's not normally what I hear from kindergartners. That's awesome.
No, so I was really, really interested in reading, and my mom and I would go to the library every single day. And I got really interested in space books. And so it just basically turned into us going to the library every day and learning about space. And I figured I wanted to do that for the rest of my life. And then I was thinking about, maybe I could be an astronaut too.
Ooh,
but yeah, but then I learned that you could like die going to space, and I wasn't really prepared for that. So yeah, and then I thought about a couple other career options, in middle school, including I was thinking about joining the Army or the Air Force. I was thinking about going into like aeronautics with the military. And then when I was like 13, I just kind of stopped thinking about my career altogether. And didn't
more really important things.
Yeah, right. I really didn't care what I was gonna do. And then when I was 16, I took an AP psychology class, and was immediately hooked on learning about the brain. And I remember the third chapter was the biology of psychology, and I was just so fascinated with the idea that, the things that are mentally happening for me are being caused by something physical. And so that was kind of like the main draw that I had to neuroscience. And I decided that night that that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I have so far. So then I went to college with a pretty clear plan. I was interested in researching the brain. And I was hoping at the beginning of college to go to medical school. But I didn't really have kind of a solid thing that I would do outside of brains are cool,
Awesome. And that's why we love our AP Psych teachers, because they pull people to the dark side of psychology. Come over.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you're thinking med school because you can do neuroscience in med school, right? Because you can end up being like a brain surgeon or other types of neuroscientists in that field. What went into the decision to go more of that psychology route and less of the med school route?
Yeah. So I was originally interested in pursuing medicine. So my girlfriend in high school was involved in a really severe accident. And I was so amazed with the care that she got with her trauma team, and I don't know, being in that situation for a number of weeks, and I guess seeing, what goes on in like a trauma center was really interesting to me. And so I don't know. And on top of that, I work really well with like high stress, high stakes things. So I
Nice.
figured, okay, this could be a great career option, and I can combine, my interest in brain science and do something with brain trauma. So that was what I was thinking. And then I had gotten a job as a behavior technician um, at a clinic at the University of Nevada, Reno. And I really enjoyed the job. However, it really didn't fill the void that I was hoping to
Mm.
learning wise. So I feel like I gained a lot of important skills in, patient care and working with patients of different populations, but it definitely did not feel like what I wanted to do forever. And so my professors in college were talking about potential career routes, and almost everyone always said that they wanted to go into medicine. And so
Mhm.
my professors early on were really encouraging, don't just look at medical school, there's other career options. The likelihood that you love medicine now, mostly individuals at age 18, it's probably not going to be the same, once you learn some more. And that
Yeah.
was definitely the case for me. I did want to kind of keep with clinically translatable research, and working with patients to do research, but on the research end, not on, the patient care end.
Right. So going back to your love of books and learning and reading, that's more
Hmm.
what you were focused on.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I thought, what interested me about working with patients is kind of the individual differences between what happens to people when they have a brain injury.
Hmm.
Um, and then I realized I could do that without going to medical school. So,
Without all that heartache.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I couldn't envision myself, you know, just being like a neurologist only
Hmm.
and not being able to keep continuously contributing, to the body of research about the topic I'm practicing.
Hmm.
So,
And
so
you
yeah.
said that you really liked like the individual differences, like things, how people respond differently to trauma and things like that. Do you want to expand a little bit on what you've learned about that?
Yeah. So, currently I'm a PhD student at the University of Iowa. And I work with doctors Daniel Trudeau and Aaron Bose, who are both in the field of neurology. And so I've been learning a lot in graduate school about the outcomes of stroke, the cognitive and behavioral outcomes of stroke. And it continues to fascinate me every single day. I look at this type of data that an individual, let's say with just a very, very small brainstem stroke, could be completely comatose for the rest of their life, or, have locked in syndrome or something like that. Yet someone could have like a complete hemispherectomy, removing one side of the brain, and still be able, for the most part, to complete daily tasks and live fairly independently. And I don't know, that just floors me how, you know, obviously the size of a lesion is related, to the deficits, but the location as well, and just tiny differences between, a couple millimeters completely change, you know, how the patient is going to experience, life moving forward.
Wow.
So, so yeah, that's really what interests me about the individual differences with brain injury.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go backward a little bit. You were considering med school, you had some advisors that were great that told you to look at different options.
Mhm.
How did you end up deciding officially on psychology?
Um, so I guess I never really made a final decision on it. Um, I
Just happened.
figured, yeah, I figured like, I wanted to study the brain for the rest of my life. And there's kind of two main common ways of doing that, and that's either medical school or graduate school.
Hmm.
And I'd already figured medical school wasn't going to give me the type of education that I wanted. Maybe I would pursue it later, but probably not. uh, But I was learning about, the things that you could do in grad school. For example, being able to conduct your own research on topics that you want to study.
Hmm.
Uh, and that was very appealing to me. So it was just the logical next step to continue doing what I like doing. Because I think career-wise, that's my biggest motivator
Hmm.
to, pursue something in favor of something else, is that I like it.
That's
That's
a good
pretty much
reason.
my, yeah, that's pretty much my main thing. Hopefully have enough money to survive, but more than anything, it's just how I would be able to do what I wanted to do.
All right. So since you're in grad school, you're kind of set up perfectly for some of our listeners who are thinking about going to graduate school. So, what kind of things did you learn along the way of kind of applying to graduate school? What did you need to do during undergraduate to kind of set yourself up for it? How did you decide what type of grad school and where and those types of things?
Yeah, sure. So, I first did kind of an in-depth assessment of myself, of what are the topics that I want to study for my career. What are the big questions that I have? Those kind of like questions in life that you want to answer before you die. Like, what are those questions?
That's a great place to start.
Yeah, so I was writing down, some of my major questions. I was thinking about works of literature that I had read or journal articles that I had read that had really piqued my interest, and would be something I would be interested in studying. And so I, kind of wrote down a list of potential topics, narrowed it down to three different topics, and then that was able to help me a little bit narrow down which schools I would apply to. Um, but even going before that, as far as the preparation that it took to be able to apply for schools, um, so I'm a first generation college student, so I really didn't have anyone to go to ask, hey, what do I do? Um, how does one even attempt to go at graduate school? Uh, so I asked my professors lots of questions and asked people I knew in graduate school lots of questions. What types of things do I need to do? And I think the main thing that I found is figure out what skills that you feel you need to have to start doing the type of research you want to do. So, for example, at least in the fields of like psychology, like research psychology and neuroscience, um, things like computer coding are
Mm-hmm.
absolutely critical skills. I mean, every single day I need to code something. But I was never told about that in undergrad. I
Well, I
was
think that's
never.
something that's hidden. I think that's part of that hidden curriculum we talk about, especially for first generation students, is
Mhm.
neuroscience. You think you need to understand the brain and maybe how to operate fMRIs or MRI machines. But I think it's pretty hidden to young people in the career that you really need to do computer coding. Like you need computer science background.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think until I joined a research lab during my third year of undergraduate, I was completely unaware what actually truly went into making an experiment. Because, of
Mm-hmm.
course, you read in books about scientists that, oh, I had this idea and I woke up at 3 in the morning and decided I'm going to test this. And in 2 hours, you have data that
Oh,
you
it
can
doesn't work like
interpret.
that.
Right, right. But, I just had no reason to believe it was otherwise because I'd never
Right.
critically thought about it. So I started working in the lab of Dr. Paul McNeilage, researching visual vestibular self motion. So
Ooh,
how
what is
we
that?
take, yeah, so that's how we take information from that we get from our eyes, from our visual environment, and how that's incorporated with, I guess you could call it our internal gyroscope within our inner ear, which is called the vestibular system. Um, and so we get information from what we see and then what we sense about the position of our body. And that allows our brain to construct kind of a whole picture of how we're moving through space. But now, situations like, let's say, motion sickness, where you might be seeing something different than what your inner ear is sensing, that causes, conflict between those two signals. So my undergraduate research was focusing on the nature of that conflict and how to minimize it, potentially for a cure or a treatment for motion sickness or seasickness.
It's pretty cool research to do in undergrad.
Yeah, I was extremely lucky that I was able to do that type of research and able to get um, mentorship in a far different capacity from classes. So I think, of course, it's important when thinking about graduate school to take the right classes, and to take challenging classes. Don't just take a class because, oh, yeah, I don't have to attend, and I've heard it's an easy A. And that's cool if you are boosting your GPA, but grad schools see through that. Um,
Yeah.
if you have a transcript full of what are, canonically easy classes, it's better to do bad in hard classes than excel in easier classes.
Well, when we were just talking
Um,
about that kind of before we started recording about GPA and how I think students nowadays are kind of taught that GPA is the end all be all. It's what everybody cares most about. It determines kind of your intelligence and your value. And I think that's kind of the wrong take, because learning happens through failure and it happens through struggle. And so those harder classes that you're struggling through, you're probably learning a little bit more. And now obviously I'm being a little pejorative in my description of it, but still, if you're learning skills that you need to develop and things in the harder classes that'll help you, having a slightly lower GPA, you can rebound from that if you have the other experience and the other softer skills, they call them, like critical thinking and
mhm.
creativity and things.
Yeah, and I find in graduate school, those are the important skills to have. You
Yeah.
know, I think there's this misinterpretation of graduate school as essentially being undergrad part two.
No,
And that is so, so wrong.
it's so
Like,
different.
exactly. It's so different. So I would say, one reason that I initially was thinking of pursuing graduate school, it was like, oh, I love undergrad. I really like the environment of being on a college campus. I knew I didn't want to go into industry. I have no interest in that. Um, but I figured, oh yeah, graduate school will be almost like continuing undergrad, except with more personalized mentorship.
Everybody
Absolutely
thinks
not.
that. Do
Yep,
you want to walk
absolutely not.
actually, while we're on that, let's take a detour. Do you want to tell maybe our listeners how it's different?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say, so for me, undergrad, my life was really compartmentalized into different, parts of life. So for example, I had my coursework, and
Mhm.
within that I had, studying, taking exams, homework, reading, literature reviews, things like that. And I think that was the main part, of undergraduate. But there's also, other parts of the undergrad experience because, we aren't, in general, people in college are just that, people in college. They
Right.
aren't, just students. There's other facets of life. And so, I was working, sometimes full time during undergrad, trying to
Mhm.
balance, I need a job so I could survive and have money to survive. But I also, need to look at doing well in my classes. And there's also that key, social growth that
Yeah.
happens during college. So it kind of these like three major parts of the undergrad experience, at least for me. And so I assumed that would stay the same in graduate school, which it didn't. Instead, it is one kind of jumbled
Giant.
mess of all of
Giant
it.
mess. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I say that even with the way that I socialize and the people I socialize with are usually other neuroscientists.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of many friends that I have here in Iowa City that aren't other scientists in biomedicine.
Well,
Um,
I think you lose that other pillar too, because you're talking about kind of those three pillars of work, social, school, and now work and school become one. And
mhm,
so you don't usually, sometimes, like in my master's program, I had another job as well. So I was still able to kind of attain that. But in PhD, you definitely don't. Your work becomes your school, and your school becomes your life. And so all your social is kind of built around there. So you become a little bit more concentrated in that work and in kind of school, as opposed to having all those two other pillars.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the grad school experience is, I would better describe it as a lifestyle,
Yeah.
because it really, it's kind of like always present. And I don't
Yeah.
mind that, because I love thinking about the brain, even when I'm reading stuff, that has nothing to do with work. It's probably a book about brains. So I
Yeah.
don't really mind that. But that's something to consider, if you want to be able to have a greater degree of separation between, you know, like work, school, and personal life. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something to heavily consider when thinking about graduate school, whether that's, the lifestyle that you want for a duration that could be up to like 5 or 6 years of your life.
Yeah. Well, and then you have
Um,
to contend with grad school guilt when you do make that separation. So, grad school guilt's a
mhm.
real thing. Everybody in grad school talks about it. You have this guilt if you're not doing work for school, you feel guilty. You feel like you should be doing something to advance that. So, if you're hanging out with your friends, if you're watching TV, if you're just eating dinner, you kind of have this like underlying guilt all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I never had in undergrad. It was so easy for me to say, you know what? Yeah, I have a test in 2 days, but I am going to go to this party tonight. And I wouldn't think about the test. It would be like, nope, this is
No, there's
just
no more of that.
right. Like this, tonight is a night to have fun. But I'll find myself now, well, of course, before the pandemic, you know, I would be at the bar with friends, and all I'd be thinking about is my research. And it's like, what else could I be doing right now? It's like I could be at home reading, but I'm not. I could be doing this, that, or the other, but I'm not. And I think like in quarantine, it's been even harder, you
Yeah.
know, because I'm always with my workspace now,
Yo, harder to make
so
that separation. And even when you're at the bar with your friends are in the same area, so you guys are still talking about work the whole time.
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like my cohort and I, we always are still talking about brain things, just because we're all so passionate about it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, you have to wonder how healthy it is to only think of your topic of research. And
Yeah.
I think it's important to force separation in a
Yeah.
way that I didn't have to do in undergrad.
Grad school is when I developed my rule. I have a rule that when I go home for the day and when I go home for the weekend, I don't work. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, I can kind of fudge that if big things are happening, but grad school is when I put that boundary on. I was like, I can stay at work a little later if I need to get something done, but the second I go home, I'm done. And I need to
Hmm.
kind of grab that. So it is important. And obviously, that doesn't work for everyone, but setting those boundaries is helpful in grad school and in your career.
Oh yeah, I think setting boundaries in grad school is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Because and within the topic of how is grad school different from undergrad, um, the you are looked at as a researcher. I mean, people
Mhm.
look at you as you're a scientist, a baby scientist, but still a scientist.
But you're
You
more on that
know?
colleague level. You get to call people by their first names. You're working on research
Hmm.
with them.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, and even more, like my PI will ask students for input for knowledge that they have that
Hmm.
he might not have.
Yeah.
And that's something that's vastly different. People will ask what you think and what your opinion is and why.
And you
And
have to
I
have an
think,
answer.
right, right. And in undergrad, that's almost like your worst fear is your professor's like, well, what do you think about this problem?
My
And you're like,
students hate when I ask, what's your
right.
opinion? I don't have one. What did the book say?
Yeah, right, right. And I think that, that creative part of science is majorically lost in undergrad, unless you're in a research lab.
Yeah.
And even then, at an undergrad level, it's not really as much there. But like now, you have to like come up with like potential answers for questions that nobody knows the answer to. And you're being asked in public settings, in meetings, what do you think and why? And not only are you being asked, your response is taken with weight. People
Or
care about
listening.
what you have to say. Yeah, they're listening. You know, it's not infrequent that, a student will say something and change the mind of a senior scientist because they're listening to students. And that's very different.
I'm going to make all my students listen to this episode for the rest of my life,
Oh
because
my gosh.
every time I tell them that this is why I'm asking you these crazy questions, they're like, I don't believe you. It's
Oh
not like
yeah.
that. Yes,
Oh
yes, it
yeah.
is.
Like you and I have so much personal discretion. Like you have so much personal discretion over what you research, in graduate school. And to the extreme extent, when you're choosing like a dissertation topic, for example, of course, it has to be in line with the methods your PI uses, but you could do whatever you want. You could research whatever you're
I
interested
did a
in.
completely different topic than my advisor did. I ended up in a situation where I ended up with an advisor who wasn't in my field of study.
Hmm.
Longer story, but she studied something else and they let me run with it. And I ended up studying creativity and she had no idea about it. And she's like, let's learn together. And we just went with it. So you can really take it into I had to incorporate what she studied as well.
Hmm.
Um, but I still got to kind of branch out. And that's exactly what you're saying. You have that discretion to branch out on your own a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a certain way, it could be kind of intimidating. So all of the research that I do is with human patients. Um, and so when you're doing research with humans, it's kind of scarier because it really shows like, oh crap, the things that I'm doing are influencing this patient's life right now. You know, so that's kind of a different mindset to get into. But then also being able to express creativity in science is kind of a huge lesson that I've had this year. So part of, I'll be, at work, but I'll just be sitting at my desk thinking about things, thinking about, and it's usually always something related to time perception. And, I could come up with an idea and shoot an email to my advisor saying, hey, I just thought of this wild thing. Could we talk about it? And then you talk about, whatever you thought of with your advisor, and being able to actually pursue that, I think takes a lot of confidence, because you have to really believe your idea is right. It's not just a statement that you make in a paper. It's you're going to ask for funding for this. Like thousands of dollars would be piped into this idea that you had, and that's a different kind of stress than
Yeah.
classes,
Yeah. A
So
lot more writing on it.
yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, you're supported in such a profound way. I mean, any question that I have, I could ask, no matter how dumb it is. And I'm never made to feel dumb for asking, even if it's kind of a dumb question. And you do have a different type of support. I talk to my PIs pretty much every day about something.
Mhm.
And I can't think of a single professor I would talk to every day about anything, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
So
it's definitely a closer relationship.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like you get to know the people, in your lab personally too.
Mhm.
You go out and do fun things together. So, like for example, Dr. Bose took us all curling one time, just for fun. There was no underlying reason outside of it would be fun to learn this.
That's nice.
And I mean, that's something you could never conceive of in graduate school. Or, I'll have professors that are like, ooh, I like what you said in class. Let's grab a beer and talk about it. Like,
Right.
but whereas, maybe 6 months prior in undergrad, if you're going like I did, from undergrad straight to a PhD program, when, I mean, you're terrified to even send an email to a professor,
Right.
so it's very different. And I
Or if you have
think,
a good idea in class, you don't get offered a beer afterwards.
right, exactly. Definitely not. Like, I mean, if anything, maybe a professor will bring it up at office hours if you attend.
Yeah.
Maybe. But
But you
that's
have
about
to
it.
come. They have to
Right.
come.
Which students never come to office hours,
No.
unfortunately.
I've tried
Like,
everything.
yeah, I'm gonna be TAing soon, and I'm already trying to figure out how the heck I could get students to come talk to me.
I've got some
Like,
tricks if you want to know later.
okay, yeah, please let me know.
Oh, and what about classes? How are classes different in grad school from undergrad?
Yeah, so at least in my program, there kind of is one major class that is heralded as the hardest class,
Yeah.
and that's neuroanatomy. And the reason I say that is just the density of information you're learning is literally unlike anything you will have ever experienced. And like that sounds like an exaggeration. And when people told me that about this class, I thought it was a major exaggeration. Absolutely not. Um, just printing out the pre-lecture handouts, like just like the summaries of what the lectures were about, were two reams of paper to print that out. And that's just the main points. So if that kind of gives any idea to the way that classes are, I mean, it is mass amounts of information, complicated information, and you're expected to not only retain that information but be able to critically use it. So for example, we were learning, in neuroanatomy you learn this is the structure, this is what it does, this is how it interacts with other things. But that's not what test questions were. Test questions would be like, okay, a patient comes into your clinic with these signs, where's the stroke? Well, you aren't taught that. You're taught the information that will lead you to come up with that answer. So the questioning style is also different. In my neuropsychology class, for example, everything was essays, all handwritten essays in class for examinations, no multiple choice tests.
No.
And again, they would be, more complicated topics that invariably will have to include your opinion on the topic, which is different from classes in undergrad where you're asking students, okay, here's these sets of facts. There might be some critical thinking about them, but it's not to the same extent as in grad school. Um, and I don't know if this is a difference just between universities or between undergrad and grad school. I feel like, you know, we have endless resources for classes that I didn't feel
Mhm.
like I had in undergrad. For example, professors will even go so far as recording a video of them lecturing, like in class, so you
Mhm.
could rewatch it online. They post all of their slides always, all of their notes always. Like it doesn't, and I remember in undergrad, for example, I would have professors that would have a slideshow and refuse to post it. So you had
Yeah.
to furiously copy down whatever was on that slideshow because you know it was going to be on the test. But
Yep.
if you didn't get it down within the 30 seconds it was shown, you were a student out of luck. And it's not like that in grad school, at least for me.
No.
All the information is there and always available because it's more complicated, because you need to focus your efforts on understanding. So I think those are kind of some of the key differences in coursework.
Yeah, a lot less recall and more application,
Absolutely.
understanding, figuring out how that matters and why it matters in your opinion. I remember too, just the structure of classes is different. You have smaller classes, there's a lot less people in them, and you're required to participate and you're required to state your opinion and you're required to know what the reading was about. So you can't get away with not reading and still passing the test. You have to, I had professors that would send me an article at 8 a.m. and by 12 in the class, they're like, you have to tell me what this article is about, what your opinion is about it, and where we go from here. Tell me why this article sucks and why it's good. And you're like,
Yeah,
I didn't learn how to do that in undergrad.
right. Yeah, there are a lot of those skills and a lot of the confidence that you need to be able to, get up in front of a room of maybe, my class sizes are between like 15 to 20. And that's just because I have a really big cohort compared to
Mhm.
the all the other year cohorts. Um, but yeah, you're not taught in undergrad how to form an opinion about things. You are told what other people's opinions are of things. But now, echoing exactly what you said, taking again my neuropsychology class, for example, who the professor is also my PI. And we would have maybe 5 or 6 journal articles to read before every class. and I mean in-depth read and understand what's going on. And he of course knew us all personally, as individuals too. Um, and so he would just call on us and say, "Hey, you've expressed interest in, this topic. What'd you think about this sentence of this article?" And you had to have a response. Like you have to have an opinion about what you think of it. And I think that is a skill that is not well developed in undergrad.
I agree.
Yeah.
Working on it. We're working
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah. I hope when well, if I ever get to be a professor, I would hope to do the exact same thing, to not just have a class of recall.
Yeah. All right, so let's kind of go backwards once more into kind of your decision. Earlier, a long time ago, you mentioned that once you narrowed down what you wanted to study, it helped you figure out where you needed to apply to, like what schools.
Mm-hmm.
How exactly did that work? How did you figure out the schools based on what you wanted to study?
Yeah. So, first, I figured out what specific degree am I seeking. And that seems kind of obvious, Oh, you're interested in brains, do psychology. There are so many types of psychology,
So
types of
many.
neuroscience. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many levels of analysis. Do you want to work with human subjects? Do you want to work with animals? Do you want to work with like computer and mathematical models of things? That's something to consider. What types of methods are you interested in using? And so what I did, I made a massive Excel spreadsheet, and I put, for each column was like a different category of things about that school, So it would be like, for example, like, I don't know, like what's their graduation rate? Do people usually graduate from this program? How well are they ranked nationally? Um, and I would like to put a plug about that. That does not mean to say to only apply to Ivy League schools, which is a piece of advice I have gotten from so many professors, and it's ridiculous. um, because, like, yes, I am not going to deny that if you're in a PhD program at Stanford, you'll get a good education. Sure. But that does not mean if you're at a well-ranked PhD program in that field at another university, that doesn't mean your quality of education will be less. Even more so, you might have the opportunity to do things a bit more your way at like non-Ivy League schools. So just to say, do not only look at are they Ivy League or not, because I know a lot of people that did that applying to graduate schools, including me, and was sorely disappointed. I mean, it's next to impossible to get in, like especially if you're not from an Ivy League in the first place.
Yeah. And I'm sure you're going to touch on this in a minute, so I'll just briefly say you want to look at things too, like how much the advisor you're planning to work with fits with your mentality, what resources the university has. So a lot of times, and this is at the undergraduate level too, a lot of times those smaller schools, those non-Ivy League schools, can offer you more resources to help you through the process and even more kind of money to get you through than maybe some of those Ivy Leagues, and sometimes vice versa, but that you have to compare them rather than just going off the status. So yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Surely, and it's a very personalized decision. As I mentioned, you really have to figure out what do you want, what do you want to do. Even if it doesn't have to be I'm going to be this. It's what topic do you want to study. And so then I started perusing. I narrowed it down to about 25 schools that had a degree program I was interested in, was ranked fairly well, and had positive outcomes. And then I started the many month-long process of going through the university's website and reading the bios of every single faculty member in the department to hopefully find individuals that are studying things that I want to study using the methods that I want to study them. And so, like for me, I knew regardless of, my three major topics of interest were time perception, uh, phenomenal consciousness, or the kind of like what it's likeness of being a person, and the relationship between emotion and complex decision making. So I was looking for, people that studied one of those three things in some capacity. And over time, you just narrow down more and more until you get a list of, I tried to stick with schools that had at least three people studying what I wanted to study, because you won't always get your first pick with your advisor. I was very lucky that I applied to my graduate university, the University of Iowa, with the explicit hope of working with Dr. Trinnell as an advisor. And it just so happened he had an opening in his lab. So I was very lucky with that.
Mhm.
But I think a big part of that is just luck. So you need to make sure there's availability, for you as a graduate student, and funding, because you don't want to be caught in a situation where you're in a PhD program and have no funding to either do your research or survive as a human being, So that's important. And finally, I think the most critical step is to email professors, email researchers, read journal articles from the lab, you know, reach out to other, students in the lab, researchers in the lab, and figure out if it fits with, yes, your research interests, but also your personality.
Mhm.
Because if you have to work very closely with your advisor for years, and it's presumably a relationship that's going to continue beyond graduation and even be, a potential collaboration further in your career, and you don't want to not get along with them,
Yeah,
so your ability to just click with your advisor is very
it's
important.
huge.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've seen a lot of people that don't click with their advisor and the mental health toll it takes on
Hmm.
people. So finding that fit is important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then going back to what you were saying about applying to schools that have the right resources, that was a very, very critical factor when deciding which university to go to. You know, After interviews and all of that, I had to figure out, okay, I I feel like I chose the University of Iowa explicitly for two things. One, we have a patient registry of individuals with focal brain damage that is one of the largest in the world. So we have 970 some odd patients that we have behavioral data for and structural brain scans for. And that's a huge data set to be able to work off of for projects.
Yeah.
Um, Additionally, so it is an R1 school, and on top of being very high research output, we have a hospital on campus that is the best hospital in the state. And so, I mean, my office is in the hospital, so I'm spitting distance away from patients that I could interact with. And this has helped me be able to develop, like one of my dissertation projects involves behavioral testing of people um, immediately, and by immediately within hours or days after a stroke. Um, that's just not the type of research that would be possible if there wasn't a hospital on campus that I worked at, you
Mhm.
know? So you need to have the resources to research what you want to research.
I would say too, or expand how you kind of figured out who was studying what you wanted to within your universities that you had already listed.
Hmm.
That's definitely what you have to do is go through each faculty bio, look at who they are, look if they're taking it, graduate students at that time. Another way to do that as well is to look at the literature that you're reading. So you've mentioned that you were already kind of dived into that literature. So for other students who are looking at that, you can see who's writing all of these articles that you're interested in and kind of go backwards and then look at their profile and see if they are research and teaching and if they're accepting grad students and kind of look that way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that was told to me that I never did. um, but also I feel like it was, at least for me at an undergrad level, yes, I was reading journal articles often.
But you didn't
However,
understand
right. The depth of understanding
them.
compared to like now, when I mean you're expected to understand pretty much every single sentence of a journal article and be able to
Mhm.
talk about it. And that's just a skill that you build. I mean, just one single class, my first semester, we read 120 journal articles for that class. And so you learn quickly how to read them. But in undergrad, I didn't have enough critical thinking ability about the material to
Mhm.
really be able to say, like, this is who I would want to be with. So I definitely advise that for people who understand journal articles better than I did.
Yeah. Well, I always say it took me 10 years to be able to read a journal article, and I'm still learning. Like, I still have to read them twice sometimes or 3 times. It's a hard skill to learn, and to
Hmm.
expect undergraduate students to know how to do it is ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, I
And
still have students read them, but, like, to really expect you to understand it, like, it's a skill that takes a long time to develop to be able to fully read through those articles. Um, One thing I'll say too, this is a little different if you're in an area that's more niche. So, like, I study creativity and learning, and there's less researchers out there who study stuff like that. And so, if you're interested in an area that's more niche, it's going to be a little easier to figure out kind of what schools, because there's going to be less of them. That also brings its own kind of pressures, but it depends on your subject area a little bit too.
hmm, yeah, definitely. It's interesting. So there's 3 research groups at my university that are currently investigating time, and I'm not affiliated with any of them. Instead, I decided that I liked the methods of my mentors as a way to get at the problem of time.
Hmm.
Um, so it was more of like a methodological, choice for me. But yeah, it because there aren't a ton of people that study time either.
Right.
So it, it there isn't a lot of options, especially if you are opinionated about your topic already. Uh, it can be difficult, to be able to work with the handful of people that your views are in alignment with.
And I like that in a way too, because that expresses your creativity. So now you're trying to get at your topic from a different angle, which is
Hmm.
creative, innovative, and now can set you up in your career a little bit better because you're approaching it differently.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, from what I've gathered, I think one of the biggest mistakes in grad school is to try to emulate the research of others. You see, let's say you see this person that you look up to, as an academic or as a scholar, that, their work is amazing, their research is amazing, and it's like you want to be just like them. Well, the reason you like that person is because what they're doing is new and innovative. And if you're doing the
Right.
same thing,
You're not new and innovative.
right, you're just doing the same thing that's already been done. So I think it's important to start thinking about how can I look at these complex topics in a way that no one else has?
Hmm.
And kind of figuring it out on your own. Like, how,
Yep.
if I knew nothing about this, starting from like first principles, how would I look at this problem? And just kind of going from there.
I think that is one of the biggest things you learn in grad school is how to be your own individual. And like you've said numerous times, how to have the confidence to be your own individual.
Hmm.
I think in undergrad, you really learned that lesson more in your personal and social life. And in
Hmm.
grad school, you really learn it in your professional life. I remember learning, and unfortunately, towards the end of my grad school experience and not early enough, that I had to break free. I couldn't just follow what everybody was telling me to do. I couldn't just, like in undergrad, I was able to do XYZ. My professor told me to do XYZ. I carried it out. I had good grades. It was awesome. In
Hmm.
grad school, you can't just do that. You have to create, you have to innovate, you have to find something new, break out. Sometimes you even have to go maybe against the advice of kind of your advisors or your professors in order to get to where you need to be. And that's a hard life lesson that grad school teaches you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's where choosing a good advisor is important for things like that,
Very
because
important.
inevitably you're not going to have all of the same scientific viewpoints as the people who mentor you. And if they're completely unaccepting of other viewpoints, that will make your life more difficult than it needs to be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of another quality to think of about, with an advisor. And that can be something that can be directly asked. What is your response if a student comes to you with an idea opposite of your own? How would you handle that?
Yeah. And that's a really good time to ask the other grad students in the lab. So when you go on interviews, you definitely want to sit down with other grad students without the advisor there and
Hmm.
really kind of get a sense. And they're always going to color it a little bit because they can't tell you maybe the full truth or all the real gossip, but you'll get a
Hmm.
sense from the other grad students what it's really like to be in the lab.
Right. And I think gauging the level of enthusiasm that the grad students have as well. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I know I'm motivated to be productive every day because I want to do well for my advisors. They work hard for me, so I want to work hard for them. But when you have, let's say an entire lab of people that are, pretty unmotivated or like seem scared of the PI or,
Yeah.
seems like there's kind of some tension, that's might not be a lab that you want to affiliate with.
Want to be in. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what are your next steps? And I know you're still kind of in your infancy in grad school, so you don't necessarily know, but what are you going to do next?
Yeah. So, kind of depending on the number of first author publications that I get in graduate school, I'm almost certain that I'll pursue a postdoc before I start applying for professorship positions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so my dream postdoc position is actually in Europe with the researcher Carl Friston,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, I mean, he's a huge name in the field. It would be very difficult to get into his lab, I feel like. Um, so yeah, doing a postdoc, that would be like my absolutely dream situation, but it's also important to have like other backup plans. So I've already started looking at potential postdoc advisors,
Nice.
um, and kind of try to keep that in the back of my mind when I'm choosing research directions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what skills do I want to learn now versus during my postdoc? Um, and then, yeah, my end goal is I want to be a PI and professor at an R1 research institution.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the end goal. But that's also a kind of a ambitious end goal, which I know as well. So, but all the more motivation to work hard.
And then can you just briefly explain for maybe listeners that don't know what's the difference between a postdoc and that end goal of being a professor PI that you have?
Yeah, sure. So, people pursue postdocs for a variety of reasons. Um, from what I've gathered, there are two main reasons that people seem to pursue postdocs. One is to get a different perspective with different methodologies. So, when you're choosing a postdoc, you don't want to choose something that's the same thing that you've done before. Ideally speaking, you would learn a certain set of methods in grad school, and then you'd learn a certain set of methods in your postdoc. And when you have your own lab, you'd be able to combine those methods to research a topic you want to research. Um, but also, another reason that people pursue a postdoc is to get more publications. Um, it's very important to have first author publications in, you know, reputable journals, good journals, when applying for professorship positions. Obviously, it's not the only thing that matters. There's so much more that goes into it, but that is kind of a critical factor because it shows productivity as a scientist.
Yeah. And let's distinguish too that that is different at the type of university you're applying to for professorship. So for you specifically, it most certainly is because you're wanting R1, which means a research one, a heavy research outputting university.
Hmm.
And so the expectation of having already conducted research and being productive in your research is important. Now,
Hmm.
there's different types of universities, and so universities do different varying levels of research output. So there's some that are kind of in between And there's smaller liberal arts colleges that don't really focus on research output as much. And so what you need at those universities is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to kind of clarify that, that outcome is a little bit different depending on what type of professorship you want to achieve.
Good
But
to
for
know. I
you,
had no idea.
yeah, for you especially, it's absolutely important. So you're on the right track for yours, because if you want to research one, it's a tough market and you need a lot of research. But for me, because I'm on the opposite spectrum of you, I do a little research for fun, but I'm not as intense in research. I focus more of my effort on teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's even positions within R1. So my university is a research one university, but I don't do research. So they don't require me to have as much publications. And so for me, applying to my positions, I need a different set of criteria. Or if I was going to, a smaller liberal arts college, I would need less publications than at a bigger university. And so we won't talk about this ad nauseum, but essentially, if anybody is interested in becoming a professor, you're going to want to look at what type of professor you want to be, because there's multiple types and there's multiple types of universities. And what you need for each of those is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would also say to people that are considering a career as a professor or an instructor of some sort, there are like certificate programs to learn how to teach, because that's not something like, so
You don't
for
learn
my,
how to teach in grad school. In
no,
most
no, that,
places, you
yeah,
don't
no,
learn how
that
to
is,
teach.
no, and that's not a skill, because it, a lot of people don't want to be professors. I mean, there's so many different career directions you could go that it would be ridiculous to teach everyone, oh, this is how you teach a college class, when people
Yeah.
don't want to do that. But at least from my understanding, most universities have some sort of certificate program, or at least classes that you could take on college teaching.
Or if your
Um,
university doesn't, because some universities don't, there's online versions of them too.
okay. Okay, yeah, that's good to
Yeah.
know. I'm fortunate enough that my university offers a certificate in graduate teaching.
Nice.
Um, but I mean, that is a critical skill if you want to be a professor,
Yeah.
and you need to show that you could teach,
Yep.
because I think, contrary to what some people might think, uh,
It's
and
not easy.
no, no, and as I'm sure you are painfully aware, it isn't just standing up in front of a group of students and talking for an hour. Like, that's
No.
not what teaching is.
Well, and a lot of people think it's easy. Like, I love my husband, bless his soul, he's in finance, and he's just like, well, one day I'm just going to go teach at a junior college because I know my topic. And I'm like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You can't just go up and teach and do it well, but
Right,
people think you
exactly. I
can.
mean, there's a lot of like nuances to it, and a lot of, you know, wait, you need to consider not just your own ego of, I'm an expert and I get to talk to undergrads.
Yeah, being
Cool.
knowledgeable in a subject does not a good teacher make.
No. You need to have, at least my opinion, you need to have a passion for making other people understand topics and encouraging them to have their own thoughts on topics.
Well, and there's a whole science literature on how people learn and how we teach how people learn. And so
Hmm.
there is neuroscience, like you study time perception and you study how the brain works. There's research out there that shows exactly how people learn. And it demonstrates that standing in front of a class for an hour and telling people things isn't how people learn. And so there is a whole body of research out there too, which you don't get access to unless you're searching for it a lot of the time, or unless your university has a teaching program, which some of them do. And I think it's becoming more popular. But a lot of times, if you're wanting to teach, you have to find that on your own.
Hmm.
And if anyone is in that camp and wants to know, you can always reach out and email, because I know a lot of programs. That's my area.
Yeah, I think, yeah, being able to teach and teach well, is a critical skill to develop in grad school if you want to become a professor.
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to be one of the professors that I would skip their classes because they were boring lecturers. Because I don't know, I don't learn well in a classroom in the first place. Like, I don't learn well just getting talked at. So a lot of my undergrad classes, I wouldn't attend the class and I would just read the notes and read the textbook and try to read literature on it. And I really don't want to be that the professor that students feel inclined to do that with.
All right. Well, we're coming up on time. Is there any last minute advice that you might have to people that are seeking either graduate school or neuroscience?
Yeah, I would say just do what makes you happy. And like that sounds so basic to say that,
That's
but
my favorite piece of
seriously.
advice.
Yeah, no, seriously, like if you aren't doing things in life that spark joy, then why? Why are you doing it in the first place? Like, what does it matter? Like, just do something else that you like. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be, let's say the type of career that, society looks at and says, yeah, that's a successful person. Well, it doesn't matter if they're not happy. So just be happy, do things that make you happy, and kind of make that kind of the center of your planning.
Good advice. I would say
Thanks.
also look at money a little bit because after you get out of school, money starts to matter a little bit more. I learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
But in my full millennial mindset, I think that you can do both a lot of times. I think that you can find what makes you happy and find ways to have that make you some money.
Yeah, absolutely. Which grad school can do that. It took me forever to learn that grad schools might pay you to go there.
They do
Like,
pay you to go there.
yeah, like I mean it's less common that you're not paid
Yeah.
to get a
And you get
PhD.
paid. You just don't get paid a lot. So you're going to stay in that undergrad kind of lifestyle for a while where you're not living large, but you're
Hmm.
living.
Right. Exactly. And
Yeah.
if that's something that you're happy with, if you're someone, like I personally really don't care about financial assets this early in my life,
Yeah.
as long as I have food and a roof, that's fine.
Yeah.
Um, but you're right. That is something that you need to consider if you are wanting to, make bank right out of undergrad. Grad school is not where you're going to get
No,
it.
you won't. I also say too, sometimes like the degree, I get a lot of students that think that PhD automatically equals success and money.
No.
And that's a fallacy. That a PhD definitely opens more doors for you, and people with PhDs definitely can earn higher income than other degrees. But you can make just as much money with other types of degrees as well. Like the thing I usually tell people is that my brother has a high school diploma and he makes more money than I do.
Yeah, like,
So it's possible.
right. Yeah, I'm a big supporter of the idea that four-year universities aren't for everyone. It's just explicitly if you need the knowledge that could only be acquired at a
Mhm.
four-year university. So, there's no shame in not going to grad school, even though you did well in undergrad, or not going to college if you did well in high school, or even if you didn't do well in high school. Like it doesn't really matter. Just try to get the type of education to do what you want, and that doesn't always equal grad school.
Yeah, that's the biggest piece of advice is look at the jobs that you want and see what degree you need for that job
Hmm.
and go there.
Yeah, and don't pursue a PhD just because you don't want to get out of school yet. That is a terrible life
Honestly, though,
choice.
that's one I think I've heard from most of the PhD people that I've interviewed on this podcast.
Really?
We've all kind of continued in because we wanted to stay in school in some way. So
Oh
you're not
man.
alone. I did that. A guest I just interviewed last week said the exact same thing. I think that's a common reason for people to go to grad school.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. Personally, I'm not a fan of sitting in classrooms and classes. Like the idea of having to take more classes in grad school was borderline nightmarish to me because I think I've just hated courses since I was probably 13. Um, but if you could push, at least for me, pushing through the courses and getting to the research, I'm cool with
And
that.
you also in grad school, that's another thing too that I don't think people realize. You're not taking coursework, so you're not in classes the entire time you're in grad school. You
Nope.
take courses for the first usually 2 years. Sometimes different universities have different requirements, but usually the first 2 years you're maybe in courses. And then after that, you're just fully in the job of researching and doing, if you're in clinical, you do some practice as well. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we only like I'm only required to take 8 classes for my PhD, I believe. Like
Right.
8 major
Yep.
major classes that aren't like a 1 semester hour module, for example.
Yeah.
But like,
And you
yeah,
usually take less within a semester too. You're not taking like 5 classes like you did in undergrad. You can't
no,
devote that much time.
nope. In my program, most people usually just take 2 at a time.
Hmm.
So usually totals like 6 semester hours, per semester.
Hmm.
And it usually ends up that it's divided about half and half between the amount of time you spend in coursework and research, at least for the first 2 years. So like
Hmm.
20 hours on courses, 20 hours on research.
Yep.
So
Well, good. You gave a lot of advice for students that are wanting to pursue grad school. So thank you. Thanks for your time. It was a lot of fun.
yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for listening. Head over to our website at careerjourneypodcast.com for more info, the latest episodes, and to join the discussion about careers. See you next time.